MGM posted this image from the Adventures of the Grand Gooligog and told us something very specific. There are clues in this picture and to get to reading. And after going through this image, I don't think the clues are random Easter eggs. I think they're trying to tell us something much bigger about Ethan's books. Because look at what appears in this one illustration. A storywalker, a bookmark, a tree, mushrooms, a blackbird, winged insects it seems, a strange symbol, and a creature we haven't identified just yet. Welcome back to Real Good Talk. Now the Grand Gooligog isn't new and I know it's been talked about in the From community before, but MGM just posted a few days ago back about us looking for more clues and that caught my attention. So like, why point us back to this book now? So I went through what they posted and there are definitely some connections worth talking about again. If you enjoy From theories and breakdowns, subscribe and join the Real Fam community. All right, let's go. Most of these things already exist in Fromville, and that gives me a theory. I don't think the Adventures of the Grand Gooligog is predicting Fromville. I think it's a distorted record of it. Now, I think information from Fromville has been leaking into the outside world for years, being interpreted as dreams, visions, paintings, and stories. And if I'm right, then the most important part of this picture isn't something we've already seen. It's Fred, because Fred can do things Julie can't do yet. And I think this book is showing us exactly where Julie's story is going. Let me show you why. Before we even touch this picture, we have to establish something the series has already shown us. Miranda knew Fromville before she even arrived there. She saw things, she painted things, she had visions connected to this place without physically being inside it. That's important because it establishes a rule. Information from Fromville does not necessarily stay in Fromville. Somehow Miranda realized it, and once she accepted that, Ethan's books became a lot more interesting. Because what if Miranda wasn't the only person receiving pieces of this place? What happens if somebody experiences those same things of visions but doesn't know what they are and what they're looking at? Miranda painted them. Another person might write them down. And if that person happened to be a children's author, Fromville could become a children's story based off the evidence that MGM just gave us. Fred is a storywalker. Julie is a storywalker. That's not me interpreting the artwork. That's a direct connection. The children's book contains a supernatural ability that actually exists inside Fromville. But here's the part that matters. Fred understands storywalking better than Julie does. Julie can enter different moments. Fred can choose them. And Fred tells us exactly how. A bookmark. That means the Grand Gooligog isn't simply describing something we've already watched Julie do. It's describing the advanced version of her ability. And that gives us our first prediction. Julie is eventually going to learn how to choose where the story walking begins. The show has already given us the instruction before Julie understands how to use it. Julie already tried creating a bookmark and it didn't work. At first, that sounds like evidence against the book. I think it's the opposite, because Julie assumed she understood what bookmark meant. She brought something with her and tried to leave it inside the story. But what if that's how a bookmark is not supposed to work? Think about an actual bookmark. Its usefulness comes from its relationship to a specific page. So I think Julie's mistake was trying to create the connection when we know the connection needs to already exist. And Fromville has never not shown us objects connected to previous chapters since the beginning. This town is filled with things belonging to people who've came before. Clothes, drawings, personal objects, buildings, relics, things from completely different periods. We've assumed they're all remnants. And if storywalking requires an anchor to a specific chapter, those objects suddenly have another possible function. They already belong to the past. Julie wouldn't need to create their connection. The connection already exists. And there is one place in Fromville where objects connected to mysterious numbers have already been collected and preserved. The bottle tree. This is where I'm taking my first big leap, but there's logic behind it. We spent seasons asking, what do the numbers mean? And maybe the numbers aren't the entire mystery. Maybe their purpose is identification. The book tells us a storywalker needs a way to select the chapter, right? So Fromville gives us a tree filled with individual markers containing numbers, and Julie has an ability to let herself enter in different points in Fromville's history. But those three things together, storywalker, bookmark, number markers, my theory is that the bottle tree or something operating on the same principle eventually helps Julie identify specific chapters in Fromville's story. Not because there's a tree in this picture. The tree in the illustration is the supporting imagery. The real evidence is the mechanic the book describes. Julie needs a way to select a destination, and Fromville already contains something that looks suspiciously like an index. This is where the smaller details become important. Not because each one needs its own theory, because together they establish that illustration, and it seems to be drawing the imagery from Fromville. Look at the mushrooms. We've already had mushrooms become part of Jade's experience in this place, right? And Jade is one of the characters most connected to seeing fragments of Fromville's history. Then look above the Gooligog, a black bird. Now, crows have been associated with entering From since the very first episode. Then look inside the vegetation. Those little wing shapes resemble insects, and we've already watched cicadas become a physical manifestation of one of those Fromville supernatural forces. Then there's the tree. Again, trees are everywhere. Even Victor talks about the trees. But inside Fromville, trees don't simply sit there. The fallen trees mark entry. Faraway trees transport people. The bottle tree contains information. Trees are part of the machinery of this place. So I'm not arguing mushrooms equals this exact scene, birds equal this exact crow. It's not the point. The point is the accumulation. MGM told us this image contains clues, and the illustration contains several pieces of the imagery that already exists inside Fromville, which supports the idea that whoever created this functional story was drawing from something real. This is where the argument gets strong again. Look at the symbol associated with Fred. Now compare that to what Julie drew after her Storywalking experience. They're very similar, and what's important isn't simply that two symbols look alike, it's who they're associated with. Fred is a Storywalker. Julie is a Storywalker. That makes this completely different from noticing a random bird. If that visual similarity is intentional, then both Storywalker are being associated with the similar imagery. That suggests that the author didn't merely receive vague images of Fromville. They may have received information about how Storywalking actually works. And suddenly Fred's occupation becomes much more important. Fred can't have any job. He's an elevator repairman, and an elevator has one basic purpose: moving between different levels of the same structure. That's exactly how I think we're supposed to understand Storywalking. Julie isn't traveling to completely different worlds. She's moving through different levels of the same story. Think about Fromville as the building. Christopher is one floor, Miranda is another, the massacre is another one, the original settlement is another, the sacrifices of the children may be another. Julie has already discovered the elevator, and she just doesn't know how to select the floor yet. Fred does. He uses a bookmark. That's why I don't think that this occupation is random. It's an analogy of Julie's ability. And there's one word in this occupation that's even more important than an elevator: repairman. This is my main prediction. Julie has been focused on changing things. Can she save someone? Can she stop something from happening? But she's been told you can't change the story once it's been told. What if that's because changing the story was never her purpose? Fred doesn't rewrite stories. His occupation is to repair the system that moves between these levels. And Fromville is very obviously stuck in something. Cycles, repeating roles, people returning, events echoing previous events. Everything seems to track because something that happened long before our characters arrived. So I think Julie eventually realizes that her ability isn't about changing individual events. It's about finding the original broken chapter. I think by now we already know what that chapter is. The children. Everything keeps pulling us backward towards them. The Nkui children, the sacrifice, the roots, the symbols, the monsters, the repeating cycles. Whatever created Fromville as we know, it appears to originate somewhere around that event. So if Julie eventually gains Fred's ability to select the chapter, where does the story logically send her? To the beginning? Not to Jim? Not simply to another massacre? To the event that started the cycle? That's why I think the book uses a repairman. Julie doesn't need to rewrite every chapter after the story broke. She needs to find where it was broken. Where I'm deliberately not going to tell you that I know what this creature represents, because I don't. But that actually makes it more interesting. We've identified possible counterpoints of much of the imagery around it: the Storywalking, mushrooms, bird, insects, tree, symbol. But the largest thing in this entire picture is something that we can't confidently identify: the Grand Gooligog. That gives me two possibilities. Either it's simply the fictional character using the package all of his imagery into a children's story, or it's representing something in Fromville that we haven't properly identified yet. And that is the clue I'm watching going forward. I know that there's been discussions about its shape resembling the strange structure connected to Fatima. I'll show those images side by side, but I'm not using that to prove anything because I don't need it to prove my main theory. The evidence surrounding the Gooligog is already strong enough. One final piece of evidence. This isn't Ethan's only book containing ideas about overlapping Fromville, the flight of the Chromonacle. Ethan has been talking about the Lake of Tears since the very beginning, and that concept has continued to matter. So we don't have one fictional book actually containing Fromville's concept. We have two associated with Ethan. One seems to describe the quest in the world, and the other describes the mechanics. The Chromonacle gives Ethan the language that he would need to understand the journey, and the Grand Gooligog gives Julie the language to understand storywalking. That's a pattern. And when we combine that with Miranda receiving information from Fromville before anyone ever arrived and she ever arrived, I think we finally have an explanation. I think Ethan coincidentally owned children's books that happen to resemble Fromville, and I don't think that these books are magically predicting the future. I think Fromville's story carries forward. Miranda wasn't seeing some completely unknown place. We now know she was part of some reincarnation cycle that eventually leads to Tabitha. So those visions weren't essentially Fromville reaching out to some random person. There were pieces of a story that she was already connected to. That's why the Grand Gooligog illustration contains imagery we recognize. The author wasn't inventing anything. They were unknowingly recording fragments of Fromville. And if that's true, Fred is not simply a cute reference to Julie. Fred is a blueprint of where Julie is going. Julie will learn to create a real bookmark. She'll learn to select a chapter. And I believe she'll eventually use that ability to reach the beginning of Fromville's story. We hope. The chapter where everything's broke, because the biggest clue MGM gave us isn't the mushrooms, it ain't the crow, it's not the symbol, it's not Fred's occupation, it's not just a storywalker, it's a repairman. Not somebody who's changing the story, but someone who's finally figuring out how to repair it. Here's what I want to know. If I'm right, the Grand Gooligog is a distorted record of Fromville. And what is the one thing in MGM's image we still can't identify? The Grand Gooligog itself. And that might be the clue we haven't reached yet. So tell me what you think it represents. And if you enjoy From Theories, the thoughts and breakdowns, make sure you subscribe to my channel, join the community, because apparently MGM wants us doing homework now. And you already know I'm gonna do it. And remember, every good story deserves a real good talk. I'll see y'all in the next one.